Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about uncovering and embracing your sexuality, exploring ethical non-monogamy in a long-term relationship, and shedding childhood beliefs about how a relationship should be. But before we jump into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
Nath.
Yeah?
I had 2 nights on my own.
I know, for the first time in a long time.
For the first time in a long time. I had a solo staycation. A friend was going on a work trip. They've got a beautiful apartment that overlooks Sydney Harbour. So I snapped up those keys and said, yes, please. Thank you.
And it just happens to be during Vivid as well. So the city is looking beautiful.
Yeah, the city of Sydney is looking absolutely stunning at the moment. So yeah, it was really nice to have a couple of days by myself, working from there. I had a girlfriend visiting from interstate, so we had a dinner date. Super nice couple of days to have some space to myself. And it really got me reflecting on how we've made our interdependent relationship work and how we've kept our circles or our own independent lives alive across the duration of our relationship and how much that's changed, because I used to travel quite a lot for work.
Yeah, you did.
So we would get these occasional 1 or 2 or 3 nights apart fairly regularly. And over the last global pandemic years, we've not had that. So it was really nice to re-inject that. And yeah, it was really nice to come back together and have a big pash and be like, I missed you.
Yeah, it's just meant that we've had to be a little bit more intentional about trying to spend some of that time apart, and it was a great opportunity.
So was your fuel up the gift of my absence?
Yes, a little bit, but no, actually my fuel up was a little thing, but it was almost marking the end of the global pandemic. So one of the things we did on the weekend was go and buy ourselves some new luggage. And that's because we're actually going to need it in the next couple of weeks. So that's really exciting. We're going to jump back on a plane for the first time in a long time. And our old luggage was very much in need of being replaced. It was falling apart. There was holes in the pockets. The zips had fallen off. It was very much time for an upgrade. They'd been well and truly used. Had a good life, but it was definitely time for a bit of an upgrade. And so went and bought ourselves some new fancy hard cases. And yeah, it's just exciting to know that life is somewhat returning to normality and travel's on the cards again and things like that.
So throughout this episode, you'll hear us talk a little bit about check-in chats and having a framework and an agenda to sort of keep you on the same page. And I want to let you know that resource is available to you for free, totally free. Just jump onto the website fuelcollective.com.au/freebies. And there you'll find a whole heap of resources. But the one that we're specifically talking about in this episode is called the Happy Hour Agenda. And it is a list of questions to ask yourself and your partner. We recommend doing it once a week. Nathan and I shoot to try and do ours on a Sunday night, and it sets us up for the week ahead. So you can go jump in there, get that resource for free, and try it on and see how having some intentional check-in chats with a bit of a framework helps to fuel up your relationship. So fuelcollective.com.au/freebies.
So with that in mind, here's this week's guest.
Today we've got Alison Jamison joining us. She is a certified conversation and relationship coach for women who are coming out as bi, pan, or queer later in life. She helps them decide on what their identity means for their relationship and how to create the love of their life, the wildest fantasies. She teaches clients how to have meaningful conversations with their minds, bodies, and partners so they can create relationships that fulfill their deepest desires. Welcome to the show, Alison.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, it's really exciting to have you here.
So before we go, are you an Allie or an Alison?
I'm an Alison, unless you are my sister or my spouse, and then they both call me Al.
Then they have special privileges.
Yes.
Hey, so what an interesting field of coaching that you're in. Tell us, there has to be a story here.
There absolutely is. So I actually met my spouse when we were in high school in the US. So just before I turned 15 is when I actually met my spouse.
Yeah, wow.
We dated a little bit in high school, went our separate ways, got back together, got married in our 20s, and did the dual income, no kids adventuring for a while. And then we decided to have a child. And about a year after we had our kiddo, I realized that I wasn't straight. It had been a decade long process of understanding my sexuality. I now identify as bi or pansexual, depending on the crowd. They're interchangeable to me, but different people feel differently about those terms. And I really wanted to let my partner know all of me. And I felt like once I understood that I wasn't straight, that I really needed to share that with them. So I planned a date night and was not sure how that conversation was going to go, to say, hey, this is something new that I've discovered about myself. And in that date night, I was like, hey, I'm not straight. And my partner's like, oh, me neither. Which is
Oh, wow.
how I thought that conversation was going to go. So it led to opening a door for much more opportunities, more conversations that we had. Like, that coming out is really the initial conversation, especially if you're partnered, to figure out what that means for your relationship. And we have just been on a grand adventure for the last 6 years, figuring out what that means for us individually and for us as a couple.
So when you say the last 6 years, so the coming out conversation was 6 years ago?
Yes.
How awesome. So it's like you guys were playing like double blind bluff chicken with each other, that neither of you like had shown your whole deck of cards yet. And so I love that. Like, of all of the scenarios where you come to the person that you've shared your life with and have chosen to do life with, and you're like, hey, I need to tell you this thing about me, or I want to tell you this thing about me. And they're like, oh yeah, cool, me too.
Yes.
I think it's just the ultimate demonstration, though, that like somebody opening up and showing a little bit of vulnerability absolutely like is reflected by your partner as well. Like one person showing vulnerability will open it up to everyone else as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was interesting for me because he had known for a while that he wasn't straight, and just didn't occur to him like a thing that he needed to bring up in the context of a relationship, because we're a committed, straight presenting couple. But for me, it was like this revelation, like, oh, this is something new that I've discovered about myself. So it felt very important for me to like bring it up. And just the like nonchalance of him being like, oh yeah, me too, was like such a comfort in that like very scary conversation, to let him know like, oh, he's still on my team, and we're actually more of a team now because we have this in common that we didn't see before, which was really fun to discover decades into our relationship at that point.
Yeah.
So what did that discovery journey look like for you? Like, what was it that was being unpacked over those years coming up to that?
So I had always found women attractive, but I had justified it as, this is so cringe, but it is what it is. But I had justified it as like, no, that was like the thing in the early 2000s of being like racy and getting male attention, is like, oh, you kind of like flirt with the girls. And like, that's one of the ways that like I could attract a male partner. And it's like, straight
and that's
people
just what every girl did.
Don't do that. Yeah. So it was like reflecting on that, and then realizing that like straight women don't find other women romantically or maybe physically, sexually attractive. But I had been so steeped in the like heterosexual world that I didn't realize that what I was feeling was different from other people. And so it was really taking some time for myself, being in more LGBTQIA plus communities, like having more friends and being around that community and having more conversations with them, understanding like, oh, maybe this isn't what straight is, and really learning more about the different communities underneath that alphabet umbrella.
Yeah, I love that you've said that. So not that the labels should matter, because people are people, humans are human, but you use the language or the labels bisexual and pansexual. So do both you and your partner identify as bisexual?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Can you, for someone who's never heard that term ever before, can you give us what that means to you?
So for me, it means that I am sexually attracted to my own gender as well as other genders. So I don't think that anything is binary. I think that everything is a spectrum. So I'm attracted to the spectrum of humanity. And for me, it's more attraction to a person than a gender. Gender doesn't really take into account on who I'm attracted to.
Thank you for sharing that. But I want to go back to something that you said there about like the like late 90s, early 2000s, and like the sexualization of like women on women relationships and interactions. Like I remember the Madonna and Britney kiss, and that just being like, oh my God, what have they done on TV? Like amazing in front of all these people. And it was such a big deal. And it was like, why is this a big deal? Because it was two performers, artists performing, and they were performing something that wasn't real. And yet it was glorified as this like really sexy for the male gaze thing. And the movies that were coming out around that time, like American Pie, where there was like, you go, we go, you go, we go. And like, yeah, girls having flirtation with other girls wasn't for girls. It was for the consumption of men, of boys, of cis
Yes.
heterosexual dudes, which is not what sexuality or pleasure or desire should really be about, and that it being a performative thing that you're doing for someone else. So I think it's really important to like wrap more context around your journey too, because that might not be the same for like a young person now, that they would be like, what do you mean it wasn't okay to be openly gay? Or what do you mean it wasn't okay to be pansexual or bisexual, or be questioning your sexuality? Because I think there was a real moment in time there where it was confusing, probably still confusing now, but particularly that it was sexualized in such a way that was marketable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that had a huge influence on my like late discovery, because I did see everything through that cultural male gaze perspective. And I think that's part of why it took me a while to figure out that it wasn't just for the other. Like I was also doing these things because I actually enjoyed them. I think that it was like, I'm so glad that we have shifted away from that male centered gaze in the LGBTQ community, where we have more representation. There's way more shows. I think it helps that we have like so many streaming services out in the world now, that there are platforms where more queer friendly stories can be told, so that people don't have to suppress who they really are super far into their life. Although I know that there are still people who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s who are coming out. Like I think we're creating a world where there's more opportunity for people to come out. But I do think that it's totally okay if you are still figuring this out and you're just in the beginning of a relationship. If you're later in a relationship, I think it's totally fine to be discovering who you are all along the way. I think who I am now is different from who I'm going to be in 10 years. Like I think we all continue to grow and change. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the human experience.
I don't know if you can relate with this. Like you mentioned that you got married in your 20s, and Nathan and I, same, we got married early 20s, and people would say things like, oh my gosh, that's so young to have got married, and like, you don't even know who you are yet. And I always think like, cool, who I am at 20, 30, 40, 50, they're all going to be different versions of me. I don't feel like I'm ever going to arrive at, you know, the final copy. The final copy of Sammy, and like, that's it. She's done, not changing. Like, so I like that you've shared that, and that you and your partner have been on this journey where you've both grown and evolved and discovered things about yourself that you didn't know maybe when you made that decision to get married and do life together. But I think that's for anything. Like we could turn over a new leaf and discover new hobbies, interests, family members, like whatever it might be, and discover things about us forever. So like what you were saying, people in their, you know, later stages of life, 50s and 60s, really falling in love with themselves and discovering who they authentically are, but then also the safety to be that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's one of the beautiful things about committing quote unquote earlier in life, is that we have decided to commit to each other through these changes and with these changes. And I think that's one of the things that has helped our relationship really grow and strengthen together. Like I think of like visually the twining of like two trees together. Like we're growing, we're independent things, but like we are nurturing and helping each other grow through our root system. Our foundation is really strong, but we're still able to like branch out and experience different parts of the forest, different parts of the community, different parts of our interests don't always align. And I think that that's what really creates our healthy relationship, because we are able to have the solid foundation to grow and change together, but still have our independence outside of our relationship.
Yeah, I really love that analogy.
So 5 or 6 years ago, when you had this double coming out conversation, you said that you've been exploring and discovering new parts of new ways of having a relationship since then. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, where did you go from that conversation?
So one thing I love about my partner is he is so wildly supportive of me. And he, like, when I came out to him and was like, I've never had some of these like sexual and romantic experiences with a woman, and I'm curious, like, did I miss out on something? What does that mean for me? He's like, I support you figuring out what this means for you. Like, I'm secure enough in our relationship. If this is something you truly desire, let's figure out a way that it will work for us. So he and I had those conversations of like, what would it look like if I dated someone outside of our relationship, to see if that was something that was really important to me. What would it look like if we went to a sex club or a kink club to try out some of these things that we think we're attracted to, but we're not certain because we haven't directly experienced them? What are some of the options that we didn't consider when we got married because we didn't even know they really existed? Like, I come from a really tiny, mostly conservative town. We had lived in some bigger cities, and like exploring my sexual identity also helped me to kind of peel back the curtain and see what else is out there for sexual experiences. It opened the world to like the kink community. And I was really curious about some of that. And he was just like, yeah, let's figure out what that looks like. And it wasn't always comfortable, but we were always secure that we could come back and have a conversation about it. Like, what didn't work? What did work? What do we want to do differently next time, so that we can continue growing ourselves and staying connected in our relationship?
So, Alison, where did, like, from that coming out conversation to giving each other permission to go and have some of these experiences, what were those first kind of instances or experiences like where you've left, I guess, the dynamic of a monogamous, married relationship and you've gone off and you've had some of these experiences? Like, what were the first few like? Like, did it just totally revolutionize both your relationship with yourself and your relationship? Or was it a bit like, oh, okay, nothing really changed?
Well, almost immediately, our sex life got better. We were able to communicate things that we were desiring that we hadn't given ourselves permission to ask each other for until we had that coming out conversation. So we were able to ask things of each other that we didn't know either that the other person wanted or that we had even considered bringing into our own sex lives. There were still emotions that we had to process. Like, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Like, there is a lot for me specifically. Like, I had to remind myself that, which was so interesting because the fears that I thought were going to come across for him are actually fears that I held for myself, which is not really surprising when you know how your brain works. But like, I had to go through and remind myself that like his sexual identity has actually nothing to do with me. Like, he's still sexually attracted to me. Same in reverse. Like, I'm still attracted to him. I'm also attracted to other things. Like, it doesn't mean anything negative to me that he is attracted to something else and vice versa. So it was going through and processing some of those emotions and then allowing the other person to experience joy outside of our relationship. I think a lot of times, at least what has been modeled for me, is that you make your partner happy. And if anybody outside of your relationship makes your partner happy, then you should be jealous. And that's not a healthy or sustainable way, I think, to maintain a decades long relationship. So it was a lot of processing, like, what is his, what is mine, and how do we bring those things together to continue having those conversations. And really, it came down to our commitment to each other and figuring out what was going to make it work, even if there were stumbling blocks along the way.
I think it's completely unrealistic to think that your partner is going to be that one-stop fix-all, like, does everything for me, or like is the person that you go to for everything. Like, it's just not realistic in the end. And yeah, it seems interesting that we're more than happy to outsource housework and things like that. But there's experiences and things like that we want to keep sacred within our relationships.
I think about it like music, that like you have your Spotify mashup looks pretty different than mine. And there's bands that, like, yeah, I might agree to go see the band with you, but you would have so much more fun with someone else who also loves that band. Mm-hmm. Like, why not the two of you who both are going to derive far more joy, go and do that together? Like, I don't know. And I mean, this is such a big part of why we started the Date Forever podcast, and playing in this relationship space was to kind of destigmatize some of these conversations around ethical non-monogamy, and just that relationships can look like however you want to design it for yourself. And the way that your parents did it doesn't have to be the way that you do it, or the way that, you know, what's been modeled to you on TV or in your community. You don't have to do it like that. You can choose and decide for yourself. So what was it like for that first little bit introducing non-monogamy? Like, did you have to try and navigate some rules? Did you have upfront things, or was it like touching the hot plate and then putting a rule up?
It was a mixed bag of all of those things. So we definitely established like what were some of the things that we were okay with, what some of the things we weren't okay with. And we started out like we would rather over communicate about what's going on than feel like any secrets are being kept. So that's kind of how it started. And as things progressed, like I realized that I wanted to know like high level details, but I didn't want to know like everything about what was happening outside of our relationship. As long as it was like bringing him joy and it was like we were still connecting, then that was enough for me. And he wanted a little bit more information from me than I needed from him. So it was like figuring out who's comfortable with what, allowing that to go, making sure that we established rules ahead of time and stuck to those. Pretty early on, we realized that like drinking and any sort of like illicit drug use was not going to be tolerated by our partners because we didn't want that in our household. And we also know that like alcohol and other drugs will lower your inhibitions and you might cross boundaries that you had set before that. So those were like some of the things that we learned throughout the process. We read Polysecure, which is about attachment, trauma, and consensual non-monogamy, just so we had some more foundation about what are some of the rules that other people have gone through. Like we don't have to blaze the trail completely anew, and what will work for us. And we also committed early on that like the rules for our relationship are determined by us. Like we get to decide what those are. Before we came out to each other, it was like you are heterosexual in a monogamous relationship and that's the end all be all. So we had to renegotiate like what does our relationship mean now? And then also like no decision is forever. Like it's okay to try on something and then decide like this isn't for us. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's such a important point that you've said. The relationship that Nath and I have now looks so vastly different than like the beginning. And one part is that age and stage, but also just the way that we've evolved as human beings. And there's things that wouldn't have been okay or were okay early in our relationship that just wouldn't fly now, and vice versa. There's things that we've got firmer boundaries around, and there's things that we've got softer about.
Lost the boundaries.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, that just because it has been a certain way for a period of time doesn't mean it always has to be like that, and vice versa. Like we spoke to another polyamorous couple recently, and they were in the early stages of having a newborn child. So the last kind of like 18 months, 2 years had the rules, I guess, around that relationship had been very different because the needs of their family were different. And I think it's really worthwhile to say that like things can be up for negotiation all the time in the way that you do life together. So
I think that communication piece is key there, though, that you both understand the rules and you both communicate and work out the rules together, I guess, too.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you have to be willing to negotiate with each other to figure out like what's going to be the best for each individual and also for the couple together, and a commitment for consistency around those conversations. Like you can't go months without checking in on what's happening outside of your relationship because there can be huge changes there. Like being committed to weekly, if not daily, check-ins to have like true meaningful conversations is really important, especially in the early stages when you're both still figuring out like what will work for you.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you kind of still present, obviously, as a heterosexual relationship. How do you navigate that? Do you identify as a queer couple? Do you identify as a heterosexual couple? Like, does it even matter?
Outside of ourselves, it really doesn't matter. We are active in our like local queer community. And so we have the connection there. And the people who know us like know that we are a queer-ish couple is kind of how we say it. And when we have gone out on dates with other people, like we're very upfront about who we are and who we're seeing, and like that we are in a committed relationship, like we are married. We're not looking to change that status at all so that everybody involved can be on the same level of consent and being informed of the entire situation. So we feel like even though we present as a straight heterosexual couple, also being more vocal on our own podcast helps people to realize like, oh, this is a rainbow family. So that definitely helps. But it was hard, I think, when I first came out to truly feel like the outside community could embrace me because I was in a straight presenting relationship. But I think a lot of that had to deal with my own internal baggage about what it meant for my sexuality to present itself later in life when I was already like tagged in a straight relationship.
And I guess that's the thing, like internally you probably felt like you've changed, but externally presenting to other people, it probably didn't look like there was actually that much of a change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then Alison, like, how did it go coming out to your family? Have you done that? Or just into your creepy pit of the internet? That
This is where I'm coming out to my family now.
Here's a podcast episode. Yeah, just listen to this.
So I did come out to my sister and she was like, yeah, okay, I kind of knew that already. There was a lot of people who I think saw it ahead of time. My best friend was like, yep, that tracks. Like I've known you for decades. It makes sense that that's true for you. And then I think it was even just last year that I came out publicly to like my mother-in-law and my parents. My parents are super supportive. My mother-in-law is very supportive. They've all kind of been like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I think it was harder a little bit for Tanner maybe to come out just because it's not the center of his identity. Like I feel like it's something that was very important to me and it wasn't as important, but it's also not been as big of a deal because he's just like, yeah, whatever, I'm committed to you and like we'll see what else happens, but it's not that big of a deal.
So to a follow-on question around that, like how open have you been with your family, wider friends about the ethical non-monogamy side of your relationship? Or are you still presenting as a monogamous, married, small child family? So
everyone who's important to us, like in our inner circle, know that we date outside of our marriage. We have not had, neither of us have had like a significant, like longer term relationship outside of our marriage, just because we also have a small child and like time constraints. And I have been building my business and my partner's career has kind of been taking off. So the work-life balance has shifted things where we are more in a closed phase, not by necessarily like choice, but through just convenience factors.
Just that season that we were sort of talking about before.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we are in the process, like in a few weeks here, we're going to be moving. So it's like just balancing everything else. There hasn't been that much of a priority on our dating lives. So people are aware, but it's not like we're bringing multiple partners to a family reunion or anything at this point.
I feel like your conservative family, that might just be like a baby step kind of
Yes,
thing.
absolutely.
But like you were mentioning earlier, like with streaming services and representation and stuff, like I know that the TV show, what is it, You, Me and Her, like the first kind of TV show that really paved the way for the throuple kind of thing. I feel like that we have so much more content around now that even if people don't understand, they have seen a model or a relationship model somewhere like that before. So I like that that's getting more common. So Alison, I'd really like to know, what do the two of you do now, you and Tanner do now, to keep your relationship thriving and fueled up?
So right now, I think our biggest connection is our conversations. We have a weekly date night that we've kept through the pandemic.
Well done.
Yeah, well done.
Even when we can't leave the house, it's like this is our focused time together where we're not just like watching Netflix, but there's a deck of cards called Actually Curious, and it will bring up a question. And one of the questions, even last week, was like, tell me about your childhood crush, which was so fun because we have known each other basically since we were children. But we also learned something so new about each other, just rehashing that conversation.
Oh my gosh, did you both have a crush on the same girl?
We did not. But that would be amazing. But I did realize that my first crush was on one of my like best friends in middle school, which I had not really realized was a crush until I accepted my identity. So like my story had shifted, but his had not, but I hadn't heard his childhood crush. Like, I don't think we've ever had that conversation because he was 17 when we met, and it's not something that I would have thought to come up with. And it's been really fun, like continuing to have those conversations. I love doing a check-in conversation of like, what's going really well in our relationship? Like, let's just celebrate the heck out of each other. What's something that's not working out for us right now? Like, is it that we need to bring in that housekeeper again because we're getting behind with dishes and vacuuming and nobody wants to tell the other person to do those things? Like, it's not fun for the person asking. It's not fun for the person doing. And what do we want to do differently? Like, do we want to like reconnect with our old babysitter so we can have some more dates outside of the house? Having those weekly check-ins really helps us have that commitment and leads to more interesting conversations and a commitment to our sex lives, because I do believe that most humans are sexual beings. There are some folks that are asexual where it's not a priority, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But for both Tanner and I, we are sexual beings, and making sure that we are getting what we need in that department as well. Because again, with life and having a child and a home and pets and work and all those things, like it's easy to let that slip if you don't make it a priority. So making sure that we're both connecting on that level as well.
Yeah, I really love that idea of the weekly chats. And we have a very similar agenda that we kind of run through as well on a weekly basis. And then we kind of have those bigger agendas as well that we do quarterly and yearly as well to make sure that we're kind of staying on the same page and that we're running towards the same goals. So I really love that.
Yeah, we just had a road trip where we were in the car for like 12 hours. And the first 6 hours went by in like a blink of an eye because we were like empire building of like what we want the rest of our life to look like, of like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we could do this? And how could we incorporate more of this into our lives? And we're moving to this new area. So like, what are the things that we want to dive into as soon as we get there to make sure we start building a community? And those 6 hours, like, seriously went by in 5 minutes. It was amazing.
Those are such great conversations too. And they're important. Like, if nobody is ever talking about the future or creating the future, it's not like it's just waiting there for you. Like, it is created by us. So
yes.
I love that you're having those chats. So Alison, obviously realizing this thing about yourself where you've identified a different sexuality than what you labeled yourself for the first quite a few number of decades, I'd like to know, how has that influenced your relationship with yourself since then? What are you doing to take care of that now?
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking that question. It's really important. For me, it feels like I am finally my authentic self, which one makes me feel sexy as fuck. Like,
Yes, girl.
it makes me feel so much more connected to every part of myself, like physically, mentally, emotionally, that I am like fully myself. And through that, like I am much kinder to myself. I'm much more loving to myself. And that just is like a radiating effect, like dropping a pebble in a pond, like owning my own authenticity, my own identity, and like loving every part of it has helped me create more love in the world in general. I think that's one of the things that has drawn me to like potentially polyamorous relationships, because I get to experience more love in the world in that way. And I think that that is so exciting and just something that I want to see in general, whether it's through a polyamorous relationship or not. Like there's nothing wrong with creating more love in the world.
Yeah,
love
that's
that.
so nice. So, and what are you doing? Is there anything that you're proactively doing to keep that relationship with yourself fueled up?
So I also do a daily check-in with myself. Like I have created my own little like check-in prompts for journaling in the mornings, because it really helps me stay connected to what's happening inside my internal dialogue. I think that for me, I have like three lives, like my public life, my private life, and then my secret life, which is like what happens in my brain that nobody gets access to but me, unless I decide to share it. And so journaling's a really like good opportunity for me to check in on what's happening in my secret life to make sure that I'm still staying connected to that like innermost being.
So you've got the secret, say them again for me. So it's secret life that's going on in your mind.
Your private life, which is like your inner circle, and your public life, which is everybody else.
Like what you post on Instagram.
Yeah. What your like mom's best friend knows about you. Like that's your public life.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, cool. I like the secret life. I've never thought about my mind as my secret life, but I'm going to adopt that. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do now. And if someone has listened to this conversation and they have like a little question mark that's hovering around how they want to identify with themselves and their sexuality or their gender or any of those things in that beautiful alphabet family, what are their first steps? What do they do?
So I like to call this the curiosity phase, where you're not, you know that you're probably not straight, but you're not sure where you land. I like to walk people through getting really curious about what that means, what it could mean for them, why they're thinking and feeling the way that they are thinking and feeling, so that they can be clear-ish with themselves. So even when I had my conversation with Tanner coming out, like the only thing I knew is that I wasn't straight. I didn't really have a finger on like what exactly label felt was right for me. But that was enough to start those conversations with my partner. So I think it's really important to know that you can have those conversations. You don't have to come out with any specific label, and to be willing to start having those conversations early on in your relationship if you're discovering it about yourself, because again, it creates more, I believe, an authentic bond, because you are sharing what is true for yourself with your partner. Like me being more authentic with myself and loving myself even more, like it allowed an opportunity for Tanner and I to have a more authentic connection, because it was connecting into that deeper secret life level of awareness. So just getting curious, asking yourself clarifying questions, and then being willing to have those conversations with your partner. And I think what the hardest part there is allowing your partner to have their own feelings without making them mean anything about you. Like they can react however their human reaction is going to provide, because it will be information to them that they might not have been aware of beforehand, and like allowing them to process their feelings. Because if you are just discovering this for yourself, you might have had some time to process those feelings for yourself. But again, it's brand new information to them. So giving them space to process those feelings, and then the commitment to check back in to have like allow them that initial reaction so that you can continue the conversation and not an elevated emotional state.
Not to trivialize this stage or this experience, but I think about this like if you were thinking about making a really big purchase, a really big financial purchase, and you'd been thinking about it since you were a little kid, like, oh my gosh, one day I'm going to drive this car and it's going to be amazing and I can't wait to have this car. And then you've thought about it, started gathering the resources, started thinking about it. And then all of a sudden you just one day went and told your partner, hey, next week I'm going to go buy this car. They'd be like, I'm sorry, what? You're doing what? Like, you've had all this time to process and think and prepare. And it's a new piece of information to your partner. They've had a blip of time, whereas you've had potentially a lifetime of time to process and get comfortable. And in that scenario where you've come out to your partner and they've come out in return, it's so interesting that you were able to both arrive at that place of processing internally and then share it externally at the same time.
Yeah, I think is really a part of like how we chose each other at the subconscious level that we didn't maybe even necessarily know that this is my person. And maybe we don't always know why that's our person. Like, we know some of the reasons why we make that choice, but later on, like, oh, this is another reason that maybe I wasn't aware of that this is my person.
Yeah, love that.
So what's next for you and your relationship?
Well, next is we are moving in about 7 weeks. So we're packing things up and we've purchased a home near my sister. So I'm excited that we're going to get to live near family again. And we are really just focused on digging into our new local community. So I love having like local friends. My best friend lives in Europe. And so like having...
Not convenient.
Yes, not necessarily convenient. A little bit harder to get to. So having some friends at the local level, I have learned over the past 15 years as we've moved about the United States that like having that local connection is really important for me. And I've built up the skills for us to go out into the world and create that community fairly quickly. Like, it really is about making yourself available. Like, just like dating, the more you make each other available to the other person, the faster the relationship can progress, where you can decide like, yes, this is for me, or no, it's not. And the same applies with friendships. So really getting out there, meeting new people with similar interests as much as possible. And then for us, it's making sure that we maintain the date nights and those connection pieces as we go through the life transitions to keep our foundation solid as we figure out what is absolutely next for us.
Yeah. Very cool. Hey, Alison, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really nice conversation, and I really encourage anyone who's got a question mark around anything that they're feeling about themselves and their relationship with themselves, like, explore it, get curious, ask questions. And if you want someone to bounce it around with, reach out and find a coach or a mentor, someone who's been through a similar experience, and have them ask you some maybe guiding questions to help you turn over a few stones. Because as you've explained, Alison, like, your relationship with yourself has had such a drastic impact on that relationship with self and all your other relationships. And it's a really nice place to be.
Absolutely.
So to say thank you for joining us today, we've provided a student in Indonesia a week of classroom education. So this is really special because often boys get to go to school, but not so much girls. So this project is specifically helping girls get into school, which we know has an incredible ripple effect, not just for the community, but for their country and the world. So thank you so much for making that possible.
Thank you for making that contribution. That's amazing.
No worries. So Alison, if we want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, how can they do that?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend to head over to my Instagram, which is at Alison, ALISON _Jamison, JAMISON _coaching. And even in my link tree in that bio, I have a series of 5 questions for people who are in that curious phase and want to know, like, am I ready to have this conversation with my partner? You can find that in the link tree there. It's just a series of 5 emails over the course of 5 days for you to ask some of those questions to really get the clarity for yourself.
Yeah,
and of course, go and check out your podcast.
Absolutely. Yes, the podcast is called Hey Babe, I'm Queer. It's conversations and coaching for later in life queers. And it's a mix of conversations between myself and my partner, Tanner, some coaching concepts for those exploring their curiosity, and then some interviews with folks who are finding their sexual identity later in life.
Awesome.
Love that.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.